it's Kelly Sparta again. In our first video, we talked about what personal power is, what it isn't, what the elements of personal power are, and we briefly talked about the victim mentality. In video number 2, we talked about how personal power is challenged through a lack of self-love, a lack of self-trust, and a lack of trust in others and the universe around you. And we also went more into depth on how it is that you get into the victim state, which is what causes you to give up your power, and where those things are and sort of how to bring that back. So in this video, we're going to talk about what you can do when your personal power is challenged. Now, there's a lot of different things that you can do, and we talked a little bit about it in the last video. But I want to talk to you about what's known as the Kleinman triangle first. And that's this. And we have victim, rescuer, and perpetrator. Okay? Now, this is a triangle, and you would think that you would play one role or the other in any given dynamic, but what ends up happening is we end up actually trading roles back and forth. So if somebody is the victim, if somebody comes at somebody else's face, so somebody's yelling at somebody, right? Then you've got your perpetrator who's doing the yelling, the victim who's the one going, ah, and then the rescuer who comes in and goes, don't yell at them. If you're going to yell at somebody, yell at me. Okay, great, so you're rescuing them. The perpetrator then decides, okay, I'll turn on you, and makes you the victim instead of the rescuer, right? Now, presumably, if you're standing in your power, you're not going to go into victim mode, but most rescuers aren't standing in their power, because if they were standing in their power, they would trust in the victim's ability as a competent human to be able to take care of themselves unless they ask for help. So if you're rescuing, you're not in your power. So it's really unlikely that when the perpetrator turns on you and makes you the victim, that you're going to be like, yeah, I'm in my power. Not likely. So the other option is somebody comes at your face, tries to turn you into the victim, and you do what I have been known to do in my past, which is, oh, we're playing victim perpetrator? Okay, if you want to play that game, we can play, but I'm the perpetrator. And you become the bigger perpetrator and you beat the other person into submission, right? And then you just trade roles of victim and perpetrator. And if there's a third person, they may jump in and try to be the rescuer, but in that scenario, they'd be really confused which one's which, right? You have to be careful about being in this dynamic. There is no winning in this dynamic. If someone is a perpetrator, if someone is a victim, if someone is a rescuer, no one is in their power. Even the perpetrator, and you're going to say, well, the perpetrator's in their power. No, they're really not. Because if someone is trying to perpetrate upon someone else, it's because they're hurt, they're angry, they're upset, they're triggered in some way. And remember what we said about having those buttons installed. It's not the person's fault who's pushing the buttons, which in this case is the victim. The victim pushed the perpetrator's button, and the perpetrator got mad and turned into the perpetrator and turned this person into the victim. But if you were to go inside the perpetrator's head, this person pressed their button first, so they were actually in victim mode before they turned into perpetrator. So it's like, yeah, it's confusing, but the fact is, if you're in this dynamic, if you are perpetrating, if you are feeling victimized, if you are rescuing, you're not in your power. So I bring this up because none of this is going to get you anywhere powerful or useful. All it does is get you stuck in this never-ending cycle. So you have to step out of it. If someone comes at your face, you can't be a victim by that. You have to look at them and be like, wow, I see you're upset. Why are you upset? Let's talk about that. Because I'd like you not to be upset, especially if you're yelling at me. So, it's not about owning what it is that they're bringing to your face. Okay, but you can only do that if you don't have a button installed that they're pushing. That's why it's important to remove those buttons. If you get pissed off, and because somebody pushed your button, and you're like, oh, you pushed my button and I'm really pissed at you and I'm gonna yell at you. Well, okay. But you gotta ask, is that really gonna get you what you want? Because it's very seductive to go into that rage place, especially if you've got a well of rage sitting in your being, which a lot of us do, especially if we've kowtowed and martyred ourselves and overworked ourselves. There's a lot of rage underneath there. And it feels righteous. Let me give you a hint. If you feel righteous, don't pursue it. You are out of your power. You are in massive victim mode if you are feeling righteous, okay? We feel righteous. We feel justified. We feel like we have the right to attack when we're in perpetrator mode. And that attack is very seductive because it gives us a release of that rage energy, and we feel better for a very short period of time until we realize that we've done damage, right? Or until we get the consequences of our actions, because oftentimes there are consequences when you go into perpetrator mode. So when you're in perpetrator mode, the first thing you have to say is, I'm really pissed off. I acknowledge that. I'm pissed off because I'm hurt, or I'm frustrated, or I've been damaged in some way, right? Angry is a secondary emotion. So you have to look at what's underneath the anger. And then you have to say, okay, I'm pissed off because I'm hurt, or I'm pissed off because I'm frustrated, or I'm pissed off because of whatever, right? So what do I need in this moment? And the answer is not, I need to yell at the other person and rip them to shreds, okay? Just as a hint, that is not the answer. I know it feels like the answer, but it's not the answer. And I'm throwing the pen, I believe that so much. But the answer is not that I need to rip this person's head off. The answer is, I need to feel not frustrated. I need to feel like someone cares. I need to feel like the person didn't mean to hurt my feelings. I need to feel lovable. I need to feel wanted. I need to feel welcome. I need to feel whatever it is that caused you to get upset in the first place that you didn't get. And then hold back the tide of rage and go, you know, this interaction is making me feel this way. Is that what you meant to say? So first thing is, I heard this. Is that what you meant to say? Because oftentimes our stories will kick in, and what somebody actually meant to say and what we heard are two different things. So first question is, I just heard this. Is that what you meant to say? Second thing is, okay, my feelings are hurt now, and I need this to feel better. Ask for it, because you're definitely not going to get it by raging all over somebody. Guaranteed you are not going to get it. So what you have to do is hold that rage in check long enough to get what it is that you want. Okay? And then if you're in rescuer mode, again, I'm going to say, go back to the piece from last video where we talked about it, and you have to admit that the other person is a competent human. You have to admit that the perpetrator is a competent human and that the victim is a competent human, and that they are capable of dealing with their own stuff unless one of them asks for help. And until one of them asks for help, it's not your problem. It's not your business. You have to let them have their experience and trust that they are in their power and making a choice. And if they're not in their power, then the choice that they're making is going to give them a lesson that perhaps might put them in their power in the future. If you keep coming in and rescuing them, they have no opportunity to learn the lesson that will put them in their power in the future. So you have to allow them to have their dynamic. Now, you know, there are some modifications to this. If it's a child, if it's your child or someone else's child, and they're being bullied, or, you know, there's something happening for someone who is physically incapable of taking care of themselves, if there's somebody who is mentally handicapped, physically handicapped in some way, then if they're an adult, you still need to ask, do you want my help? You don't get to go, da, 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 I will save you. Don't. Stop it, because they didn't ask. Now you can say, would you like some help? But if they say no, shut up, turn around and walk away. Not your job, not your business, okay? If they say yes, then feel free if you feel the need to step in, but remember, there's just as much of risk that you're gonna go from the rescuer into perpetrator mode or into victim mode, one or the other, depending upon which one of you, whether it's the original perpetrator or you, is a bigger perpetrator. you will either become the perpetrator or the victim, most likely in that scenario. So be very careful about what you choose to take on, because you're still going to stay in this triangle. Okay? So be aware that there's a lot of stuff, and I'm sure I have just really upset a lot of people going, but what about this person and what about that person, and they needed the help, and no, I was a kid and I needed help and nobody helped me, and The things that I have to say are very challenging for people to hear, because they are challenging our cultural programming around power. We are actually culturally programmed to not hold our own power. And we're culturally programmed that way in a lot of different ways, and it's because it makes us easier to control. If you program an entire society to be victims and to think that they are victims, then they're very easy to control. And so our entire upbringing has that programming of, nope, you're going to give in to authority, you're going to do what you're told, you're going to sit down and shut up and fly right. That's programming of giving up your power. And, yeah, it makes us easier to control. In school, it makes us easier to control. In adulthood, it makes us easier to control, but it doesn't put you in your power. And it also creates a society of dissatisfaction. So the thing that you got to keep in mind is you want to stay out of this triangle. Okay? When I was talking to you about getting out of this triangle, one of the things I talked about was stepping into and out of self-control, right? Because when that rage overcomes you and you just want to smite the person in front of you, you're out of control. You're totally out of control. You're like, ah! Your emotions are dragging you along. They are driving you forward, and your rational mind has taken a dive. It's just gone. It's on vacation. You are working entirely on instinct and upset. You need to be able to step into self-control. Now, what that means is that you need to have your observer mode on a regular basis. Now, let me talk to you about the observer. We have within us this is you. Okay, and you can see art was not my first subject. Okay, so this is you, presumably smiley, right? And then this is your observer, which is a completely different person within you who's looking at you and saying, I wonder what's going on with you. I wonder what's going on in your life. Why did you act that way? This person is having the experience of life. This person is watching them have the experience and analyzing it. Now, everybody's got this. Some of us utilize it more than others. But when you have your observer mode on a regular basis, you can actually watch this person start to lose it. Whether they're losing their power through feeling victimized, or whether they're losing their power through letting their emotions overrun them, or whether they're losing their power through buying into the idea that other people are out of their power too and having to rescue them. Whatever, you get to watch this person who's having this experience have that experience. The key is to be paying attention, because if this person is sleeping, if this person's asleep at the wheel and they're just like zzz, then this person's going to completely lose it before this person wakes up to notice. So you don't want to have your observer sleeping. You want your observer wide awake. If you keep this observer wide awake, they can actually catch it before you lose it completely over here. Because that well of rage in particular, or that overwhelm of being attacked from a victim standpoint, once it hits a certain point, it's like there's a no coming back from it zone. And you can fight your way back from it, but it becomes a lot harder. And so there's a point of no return that you don't want to go past. And if this person's on duty, you can stop that point of no return. You can take that well of rage, or you can take that wall of anger coming at you and just stop it and be like, okay, I'm going to step into my observer mode for a minute, let my experiential person over here deal with whatever's going on in the moment, but I'm going to stand over here and go, okay, what's going on? I'm triggered, I'm pissed, or somebody's yelling at me and I don't like it. Okay, what do you want to do about it? what do I want to do about it? How am I having an experience that's different than the one I want? And how do I impact that experience to have what it is that I actually want? That's what this person's having the conversation in their head about, while this person's standing there looking at the other person in the situation. Okay? If you can be in this mode as much as humanly possible, then what happens is you have the ability to impact this person. Now, there's a balancing point. Because when you're here, you're all up in your head, and you're not actually experiencing life. So what you want is you want to be in this place when you're feeling threatened, and you want to be in this place when you're not. Because you want to experience your life, you want to have a good time, you want to enjoy life. You don't want to be constantly going, well, what about this, what about that, and analyzing this, because then you're all up in your head and you're all in the future, you're not even present to the moment. Okay? So this is where you go when you're feeling threatened or triggered. This is where you go when you're not. The goal is to end up here most of the time with this person just sort of hanging out in the background going, oh, cool, you having a good time? Awesome. And that's it, right? So that's the difference between being in control and out of control, is how well defined and practiced this person is at doing their job. So the next piece I want to talk about is how to notice when you're triggered and how to step out of that trigger. So we talked about how to step out of the trigger, but how do you know when you're triggered, right? How do you know when that button's been pushed? If you are having a nuclear meltdown over something that would reasonably have a response of something like, stop that, you are triggered. So that's really the easiest way to figure it out is, are your insides churning? If your insides are churning, you're triggered. Are you having a response that is out of proportion to what's going on in front of you? If that's true, then you're triggered because you're bringing all your stories from your past up, and they're adding to whatever's going on in front of you, and you're making it mean something that it doesn't really mean in this moment. Okay? So when you are having a response that is out of proportion to what is in front of you, you're triggered. So when your emotions are like, blah, you're probably triggered. Now, that's not always true. If you're grieving, you may have wild emotions that are coming up, and that's not being triggered, that's being sad because you're grieving. You may have feelings of wild love for the person in front of you, and that's not being triggered, that's just being in a loving open space, right? But if you're having something that is unpleasant, that is causing you to want to run from the situation, or to want to fight, or to want to freeze, fight, flight, or freeze, remember, then you're probably triggered. Okay, that's how you recognize it. And the answer to that is to step up into observer mode, figure out what it is that you're not getting that you want, ask for it, and then come back down here when you feel like you're not triggered anymore. Okay? Last piece. And this is probably the most important piece out of everything. When we get triggered, when we get upset, when our buttons get pushed, the first thing we do is assume the other person is the enemy. That's the first place we go. We go, ow, you did this to me, you suck. Okay? But we just talked about that. Over the last 2 videos, we talked about the fact that it's not they did this to you. You have a button installed. All they did was go, look, you've got a button here. Do you know you have a button here? Let me push this button a little bit harder because you should really know you have this button here. And this button probably hurts. You should really uninstall that. That's really what they're doing. I know it didn't feel like that's what they're doing, but it is what they're doing. So, give them a break, right? Remember that everybody's doing the best they can. And most of the time, people do not mean you ill. Most of the time, people are really with good intentions acting towards you. And on the rare occasion where they are really actively trying to do you damage, it's because they're feeling threatened in some way. They're feeling like they needed to do that. Either because they felt like they had to get ahead, or because they felt like you were going to take something from them, or whatever, right? There's a reason behind what they're doing. And so if you want to diffuse it, you need to get past the current situation and be like, wow, I hear you're really upset. And I can see that you're really trying to hurt me right now. I'm sure you have a reason for that, and I would really love to understand what that is. Okay? There's no energy of defensiveness, there's just curiosity. You're coming back to compassion, you're coming back to love, you're coming back to a place where you go, wow, it must really suck to be you right now. I'm really sorry. How can I help? Because they're in perpetrator mode, right? They're in perpetrator mode, so how can I help? You're clearly not getting something that you feel like you need. How can I give it to you? Let me help, right? That's where you come to love and compassion. And if you do that for them and you do that for yourself, you will always be in your power. Okay? So, remember, and this is the challenge. I'm going to come back and say this again because victim energy is so insidious and you will find it in so many different places in your life. And you can do this work for years and still find it showing up every now and again. So I'm going to say this to you. If you don't own whatever the button is, it owns you. Whatever you fail to own and say, this is mine, it owns you, it runs you. And anybody who knows it's there can take control of you and run you any way they like. So if for no other reason, if you cannot talk yourself into doing this to be a more compassionate person or to be more compassionate for yourself or to be happier in your life or whatever, if you can't talk yourself into doing it for any other reason, do it because you don't want anybody else to own you. And you don't want to give them that power. And that's good enough reason to start down this path. You'll get to the other ones later. It's fine. Whatever you don't own owns you. So you better own it all. And as soon as possible. And some stuff you'll figure out along the way. Some stuff is harder to know than others. So this is why I'm saying, you'll figure it out. But it's a constant process, this process of self-evaluation, this constant process of watching yourself and looking for the patterns that are showing up. That's part of the personal growth process and is part of holding your power, is noticing when you're out. And that's why we've been talking about this, okay? So we've talked about what personal power is and what it isn't. We've talked about what the elements of it are. We've talked about victim mentality and what causes you to lose your power through a lack of self-trust and self-love and lack of trust in the universe and others. We've also discussed the Kleinman triangle and the victim perpetrator rescuer dynamic and how you shouldn't try and engage in that. You should try to step out of it as much as possible and how to do that. We've also talked about stepping into and out of control by using your observer mode, noticing where you're triggered and then stepping out, and how to notice it, and how to come back into love. So you would think we're done, right? Well, yes and no. You've got the basics. And these are very basics, just so you know. There's a lot more to it, but these will give you a good starting point. The next piece, though, is figuring out what your personal blocks are to holding your power. Because there are 36 different blocks that can exist in your energy field. Belief structures, ways of seeing yourself, ways of looking at your life, stories that you hold from your past, coping mechanisms that were established from your childhood that worked great then and are screwing you over right now. All of these things come into play. And each person has their own unique, different variation of how these 36 different elements come together. Some people will have 5, some people will have 12. Never seen anybody with 36, but it could happen. And what you have to do is figure out which one of these elements are yours, and which ones of these elements are yours, and how the interplay is happening and how to uninstall those buttons, because every single one of those 36 things represents a button. And when you have 36 different buttons, you spend your entire life in reaction. Even if you've only got 12 different buttons, you're going to spend most of your life in reaction. Okay? So it's really important to know what are the blocks to your own ability to hold your power.
So if you're ready to find out what your personal blocks are, I invite you to schedule an appointment with me for a free energy scan. In that energy scan, I will go into your energy field and go through and look at what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, where are those blocks existing. I will give you a full layout of exactly everything that you're dealing with so that you can know how to step forward from here. So if this is something that you'd like to do, there's a link on your screen right now Click on that link, follow it through to the appointment page, and make sure you hit the confirm button on the final page so that you schedule your appointment. And I will talk to you then.